January 1st, 1945, 8 a.m., across airfields in Germany and the Low Countries, nearly 900 German fighter aircraft are warming up their engines. As Schmidt 109s, Fallwolf 190s, even some of the new jet-powered M262 South. This is the largest concentration of Luftwaffe fighters since the Battle of Britain. Their mission, Operation Bodenplatte, a massive surprise attack on Allied airfields in Belgium and the Netherlands. Catch the enemy aircraft on the ground, destroy them before they can take off. In one morning, Allied air power in Western Europe. It should have worked. The Allies weren't expecting anything. Their pilots were still recovering from New Year's Eve celebrations. Many airfields had skeleton crews. The Germans had achieved something they hadn't managed in months. Operational surprise, 3 hours later, the Luftwaffe would lose over 300 aircraft and 237 pilots. Not 237 casualties. 237 pilots killed or captured, many of them irreplaceable veterans who had been flying since 1940. Operation Bodenplatte destroyed the Luftwaffe more effectively than any Allied operation could have. Let me show you how this happened, because this is one of the most catastrophic self-inflicted wounds in military aviation history. First, you need to understand why the Germans attempted this operation at all. By January 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. They were losing pilots faster than they could train replacements. Aviation fuel was so scarce that new pilots often completed training with less than 100 hours of flight time, compared to 400 hours for their Allied counterparts. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate offensive in the Ardennes, was failing. German ground forces needed air cover, but every time Luftwaffe fighters went up, they were overwhelmed by American P-51 Mustangs and British Spitfires. Something had to change, or the Ardennes offensive would collapse completely. The plan was the brainchild of General Dietrich Peltz. The logic was simple. You can't fight the enemy in the air if they outnumber you 10-1, but if you can catch them on the ground, destroy their aircraft before they can take off, you can reset the equation. One massive strike to knock out hundreds of Allied aircraft at once. On paper, it was sound. Historically, surprise attacks on airfields have been devastatingly effective. The Japanese at Pearl Harbor, the Israelis in 1967. Catch an air force on the ground and you can destroy it in hours. But here's where everything started to go wrong. The operation required absolute secrecy. So secret that German pilots weren't told their targets until the night before. So secret that German anti-aircraft units were informed that nearly 900 friendly aircraft would be flying over their positions at low altitude on New Year's morning. Read that again. The German flat gunners, the anti-aircraft crews defending German-held territory, had no idea Operation Bodenplatte was happening. Now, let me paint you a picture of what happened when those 900 fighters crossed into the skies over German-held Belgium. The flat gunners looked up and saw hundreds of aircraft flying toward them at treetop level. They weren't expecting friendly aircraft. Nobody had told them. What they saw looked exactly like an Allied attack, so they did what they were trained to do. They opened fire. German anti-aircraft guns shot down German fighters. Not a few, dozens. Some estimates suggest that German flak accounted for more Luftwaffe losses that morning than Allied defenders did. Pilots who had survived years of combat, who had shot down multiple enemy aircraft, who were irreplaceable veterans with thousands of hours of experience, were killed by their own side before they even reached their targets. But the disaster was just beginning. The attack itself achieved mixed results. Some airfields were hit hard. At Eindhoven, the Germans caught rows of British Typhoons and Spitfires, lined up on the tarmac, and destroyed over 100 aircraft. At other bases, the surprise was complete, and the attackers had minutes of free shooting. But here's what the German planners didn't account for. Allied aircraft were replaceable. Allied pilots largely survived because they weren't in their planes. The aircraft that burned on those runways could be replaced within weeks. Factories in America and Britain were turning out new fighters faster than they could be shipped to Europe. The German pilots who died that morning could not be replaced at all. This is the brutal mathematics of attrition that defined the air war in 1945. The Allies could lose 100 aircraft and have new ones by February. Germany couldn't replace a single experienced pilot. Every veteran who died in Operation Bodenplatte represented years of training and combat experience that was gone forever. Let me show you the numbers, because this is where the full scale of the catastrophe becomes clear. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 304 aircraft, destroyed or damaged beyond repair. They lost 237 pilots, killed, captured, or missing. That's roughly one pilot for every 130 aircraft lost, which tells you something about the intensity of the fighting once the Allies got aircraft into the air. Among the dead were 19 unit commanders, including 3 Jesuat Kommandoren, the equivalent of wing commanders. These were leaders who had been with the Luftwaffe since the beginning, men who had led fighter groups through the Battle of Britain, over Russia, and across North Africa. In 3 hours, almost 20 of them were gone. The Allies lost approximately 465 aircraft, destroyed or damaged, but they lost only about 70 pilots, killed. Why? The difference? Because most Allied aircraft were hit on the ground where the pilots weren't sitting in them. The Germans had achieved their objective of destroying aircraft, but they had failed to destroy the men who flew them. Here's the strategic result. Within those weeks, the Allies had replaced every aircraft lost in Operation Bodenplatte. Every single one. The American aviation industry alone was producing over 8,000 aircraft per month by this point in the war. A loss of 465 aircraft was a bad day. It wasn't a strategic setback. The Luftwaffe never recovered. After January 1st, 1945, the German Air Force was effectively finished as a fighting force. They could still put aircraft in the air. They could still score occasional victories, but they could no longer contest Allied air superiority in any meaningful way. The pilots were simply gone. Let me tell you about one specific loss that illustrates the tragedy. Major Gard Bahorn was one of the highest-scoring aces in history with over 300 confirmed victories on the Eastern Front. He survived the Operation Bodenplatte, but watched his unit get shredded by a friendly fire and Allied response. He would later say that January 1st, 1945, was the day he knew Germany had lost the war. Not because of the losses, but because of what those losses represented. A command structure so chaotic, so desperate, so poorly coordinated that it shot down its own pilot. The irony of Operation Boden is that it worked tactically and failed strategically. The Germans achieved surprise. They destroyed hundreds of Allied aircraft. They temporarily disrupted Allied air operations in the region, but none of that mattered because the cost was too high. This wasn't just a military failure. It was a symptom of the dysfunction that had consumed Nazi Germany by 1945. The obsessive secrecy that kept German flak gunners from knowing about the operation. The desperate gamble that threw irreplaceable pilots into a single-day operation. The failure to understand that destroying aircraft meant nothing if you could undestroy the industrial capacity that produced them. Here's what Operation Bodenplatte teaches us about warfare. Resources matter. Attrition matters. And understanding what your enemy can replace versus what they co-in is the difference between a tactical victory and a strategic one. The Germans looked at Allied airfields full of aircraft and saw an opportunity. They didn't see what was behind those airfields. Factories producing more aircraft than Germany could ever shoot down. The Luftwaffe had been one of the most formidable air forces in history. In 1940, it had terrorized Europe. In 1941, it had dominated the skies over Russia. By January 1945, it committed suicide in 3 hours over Belgium, killed as much by its own desperation and dysfunction as by Allied guns. So, here's my question for you. Could Operation Bodenplatte have worked under different circumstances? If German flak had been warned, if the targets had been different, if the timing had been better, could a massive surprise attack have changed the air war? Or was the Luftwaffe already so depleted that no single operation could have saved it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this changed how you understand the end of the Luftwaffe, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that reveals the disasters behind the headlines. Thanks for watching.